Clint Eastwood, as an investor in Vine and Liberty, decided to go undercover as a homeless man to investigate what was really happening at the restaurant after the new management took over and changed its values. One afternoon, Clint walked into the restaurant and asked for a glass of water. Despite a water station being right there, the manager harshly refused him, stating that the restaurant was not a place for homeless people. This experience made Clint realize that the restaurant no longer upheld the core values it once did, particularly the respect it had for veterans and the homeless. What would you do if you were in Clint's shoes and got denied a simple glass of water at a place that once prided itself on serving those in need? How do you think this reflects on the restaurant's shift in values? For decades, Vine and Liberty wasn't just a restaurant. It was a safe haven, a place where veterans could find not only a meal, but also a sense of belonging. Chuck Wilson, a Vietnam veteran himself, founded the restaurant with a vision to create a spot where fellow service members could gather, share their stories, and enjoy a warm cup of coffee at no cost. He didn't just run a business, he built a community. His customers weren't just patrons, they were family. Veterans walked in to receive the kind of respect and kindness they sometimes couldn't find elsewhere in the world, especially after their service. Many of the staff were former military themselves, and the bonds that had formed in that small dining room were strong and genuine. But everything changed when Chuck's health began to deteriorate. The mounting medical bills and a failing business forced him to make the painful decision to sell the restaurant. Enter the Corporate Investment Group, a business-minded organization looking to profit from the legacy Chuck had built. Among the investors was none other than Clint Eastwood, a silent partner, who had no direct involvement with the day-to-day running of the restaurant, but shared an interest in keeping the place going. What followed was a swift and shocking shift in direction. The new management, eager to overhaul the restaurant's image, quickly replaced the veteran staff with a younger, more diverse group of workers. Their intentions seemed well-meaning. Social justice posters were slapped up on the windows, declaring the restaurant as a safe space for everyone. But behind the slogans, something darker was happening. The veteran discount program, once a hallmark of the business, was quietly abandoned. And, most heartbreakingly of all, the sense of community Chuck had so carefully fostered seemed to vanish overnight. The restaurant's soul was slowly being stripped away, replaced by a brand new image that didn't feel quite as real. Clint had been immersed in other projects and hadn't yet visited Vine and Liberty since it changed ownership. He had been focused on his work, but one evening, as he sat in his office, he received a phone call that stopped him in his tracks. The voice on the other end of the line was that of a local journalist, a reporter who had been investigating the recent changes at the restaurant. The reporter shared footage that showed the new staff mocking elderly customers and turning away homeless veterans. Veterans who once walked into the restaurant with pride, knowing they'd be treated with dignity. This wasn't just a change in the restaurant's menu or decor. It was a betrayal of the very people Vine and Liberty had been built for. To make matters worse, the staff had been posting on social media, parading around their commitment to inclusivity and social justice, all while turning away the people who needed help the most. They had plastered their windows with slogans and banners about compassion and social good, but their actions spoke a different language altogether. Clint felt a wave of shock and anger wash over him. He had been hearing about the struggles of veterans for some time now, but this hit closer to home. Just days before, he had read a heartbreaking story about 3 local veterans who had taken their own lives after being unable to get the help they desperately needed. One of these veterans had been a regular at Vine and Liberty, back when Chuck Wilson was still alive. Back then, Chuck would greet every veteran with kindness, respect, and, sometimes, a free cup of coffee. Now, that same restaurant had turned its back on the people who had sacrificed so much for their country. That was the moment Clint knew. This wasn't just about a restaurant anymore. It was about the core values of compassion, respect, and the duty to take care of the very people who had given everything for their country. It was time to take action, Instead of confronting the management head-on, Clint decided to take a more calculated approach. He chose to go undercover. With his years of experience in Hollywood, Clint understood the power of transformation. If he was going to uncover the truth, he couldn't walk in as the iconic actor the world knew. He had to become someone else entirely. He reached out to Tom Martinez, a veteran and special effects makeup artist who had worked on several major war films. Clint knew Tom's expertise would be critical for this mission. After discussing the details, Tom set to work, applying layers of makeup that would transform Clint into someone the world had long since forgotten, a homeless veteran. "Mr. Eastwood," Tom said as he carefully applied the final touches, "I never thought I'd be helping you become invisible." With deep wrinkles, sunken eyes, and ragged clothing, Clint was no longer the Hollywood legend everyone recognized. Instead, he became just another forgotten soul on the streets, a man the world passed by without a second glance. But Clint knew this disguise was necessary. He had to experience the reality of life on the streets, the way those who were truly invisible lived. Before he even thought of stepping foot in Vine and Liberty, Clint spent hours at a local veteran shelter. He wanted to hear the stories of those who had been abandoned by society, those who once stood proudly in uniform but had now fallen through the cracks. At the shelter, he met James, a former Marine who had saved his entire unit in Afghanistan, only to come back home and lose everything to medical bills. He had no family, no savings, just a broken spirit and a deep sense of betrayal. Sarah, a Navy medic who had served her country with pride but was now struggling with PTSD, unable to find work. She could never shake the weight of what she had seen during her service, and it kept her from holding down a job or finding peace. Michael, who wore his old army jacket with pride, even though he had been without a roof over his head for 3 long years. He still carried his military ID, a piece of his identity that the world seemed to have forgotten. As Clint listened to their stories, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anger and responsibility well up inside him. Their pain became his purpose. This mission wasn't just about exposing the hypocrisy at Vine and Liberty. It was about something much larger. This isn't just about a restaurant, Clint thought. This is about who we are as a country, how we treat those who gave everything for us. It's time to make things right. It was late in the afternoon when Clint shuffled into Vine and Liberty, the restaurant now a shell of what it once was. The familiar scent of food and the sound of soft chatter filled the air. But something felt off. The once warm, welcoming atmosphere had been replaced by an almost corporate, polished ambiance. The walls were lined with virtue-signaling slogans, messages like, "Kindness is free," and "All are welcome here," intended to project an image of inclusivity. But there was something hollow about it now. Through the window, Clint could see a young, affluent couple being seated with bright smiles, their designer clothes almost too perfect for the restaurant's once humble setting. He walked past the table, trying to blend in, but as soon as he stepped through the door, the hostess's welcoming smile vanished instantly. She eyed him carefully, a look of surprise crossing her face, before quickly regaining composure. "Sir, I'm afraid we're fully booked." Her voice was polite, but it carried an edge, as though her words were more of a formality than a real offer. Clint glanced around, scanning the room. The restaurant was far from full. There were several empty tables, each one waiting for someone to sit, yet she claimed they were booked. He took a small step forward, his voice now rough and strained, a perfect imitation of someone who had been worn down by the streets. "Please," he rasped, "just a glass of water." The hostess hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. But before she could respond, a young manager appeared from the back, his polished look and designer glasses a sharp contrast to Clint's ragged appearance. "We're not a homeless shelter," the manager scoffed, his tone dripping with disdain. "There's a public fountain 3 blocks down." Clint looked past him, and his gaze landed on a water station. A well-stocked area, just a few feet away, filled with clean glasses and pitchers of water. The irony was impossible to miss. The manager, standing there with his pristine outfit and his self-righteous attitude, hadn't even noticed. But Clint knew something the manager didn't. This wasn't just about a glass of water. This was about the truth. And what the manager didn't realize was that this was just the beginning. The hidden cameras, set up by Clint and his team, had been capturing every moment, every shift in expression, every lie. The walls of this restaurant, once a sanctuary for veterans, were about to come crashing down, revealing the hypocrisy that lay underneath. Clint didn't say another word. He simply turned, slowly, and made his way toward the door, knowing that this small moment would change everything. The following day, Clint returned to Vine and Liberty, but this time, he wasn't just a lone figure walking in off the street. This time, he came with a purpose, and with backup. Clint had gathered 5 homeless veterans, each one a testament to the people the restaurant had once stood for. They were men and women who had sacrificed everything, only to be forgotten by society. With their ragged clothes and haunted eyes, they looked like anyone else the restaurant had turned away. But this time, they weren't invisible. They walked through the door together, and the restaurant, packed to the brim with customers, seemed to hold its breath as they entered. The manager noticed them immediately. His face tightened as Clint stepped forward, the sense of unease palpable in the air. "Sir, I told you yesterday." But Clint cut him off before he could finish. His voice was steady, calm, and now carried an authority that left no room for argument. "We'd like a table," he said, his tone firm. As the manager stood frozen, unsure of what to do next, a young waitress named Jenny, who had been quietly observing from the side, finally stepped forward. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty as she looked between Clint and the manager. Unlike the others, she didn't wear the same indifferent look. There was something about her, something that seemed to be stirring inside her. Without hesitating, Jenny grabbed 6 menus from the counter, her decision made in that instant. "I'll seat them," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, even though her hands shook slightly as she handed out the menus. The manager's face reddened, his anger bubbling to the surface. "Jenny, don't you dare!" But Jenny didn't flinch. She locked eyes with him, her voice tinged with both defiance and conviction. "My father taught me real values," she shot back, "not just words on a window." As the tension in the room reached its peak, a customer sitting at a nearby table squinted at Clint. After a brief moment, realization set in, and the room seemed to fall into an eerie silence. "Wait a second. That's Clint Eastwood." A ripple of recognition spread through the crowd. The famous actor, now standing at the center of this confrontation, had been right under their noses the entire time. But it wasn't just Clint's identity that shook them. It was the truth he had brought with him. The truth that the very people who were once the heart of the restaurant were being ignored, turned away, and forgotten. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. As the realization of who Clint really was sank in, an eerie silence fell over the room. The manager, once so confident in his control over the situation, suddenly appeared ghostly pale. His eyes darted around, unable to find an escape from the truth now unfolding in front of him. Clint stood tall, his expression unreadable as he slowly removed the disguise, the layers of makeup that had concealed his identity. The iconic Hollywood figure was now back in full view, his steady gaze locking onto the manager, who seemed to shrink under the weight of what was about to happen. Without a word, Clint spoke with the calm authority he was known for. "Let's talk about the charity money." From behind the manager, the TV crew emerged, their cameras rolling, capturing every second of this moment. The producer, holding a folder of documents, stepped forward and handed Clint the evidence. The financial records that revealed the shocking truth. Money meant for veteran shelters had been diverted into a fund for social media marketing campaigns instead. The silence was deafening. It was as though time had stopped. The polished image the restaurant had carefully constructed, the facade of inclusivity and kindness, had been obliterated in an instant. What had once been a place of refuge and respect had now been exposed for what it truly was: a lie. In the wake of the shocking revelation, Vine and Liberty began a complete transformation, one that went far beyond just a few changes to the menu or decor. The restaurant, once a hollow imitation of its former self, was slowly returning to its roots. The first change was symbolic but powerful. A free water station was installed right at the entrance. A simple sign above it read, "Because kindness isn't just a word." It served as a reminder to everyone who entered that true compassion was measured by actions, not just slogans on a wall. Next came the creation of the Veterans Corner, a dedicated space inside the restaurant where homeless veterans could receive dignified meals every single day. No more scraps or leftover food, but proper meals, served with respect, just as it had been when Chuck Wilson first opened the doors. Jenny, who had stood up for what was right, was promoted to manager. Under her leadership, the restaurant implemented a veteran hiring program, offering job opportunities to those who had given so much to their country. The message was clear: Vine and Liberty was now a place that truly cared. The former manager, who had been exposed for misappropriating charity funds, was held fully accountable for his actions. The funds that had been diverted to social media campaigns were returned and redirected to the very veterans they were meant to help. And when Mary Wilson, Chuck's widow, returned to see the changes for herself, she stood in the doorway, overcome with emotion. She took in the transformed space, and a tear escaped her eye. This is what Chuck always wanted. It was the reclamation of the restaurant's soul, one that Chuck Wilson had always dreamed of, and now it had come back to life. In the aftermath of everything that had unfolded at Vine and Liberty, Clint made a deliberate decision. Despite all the footage that had been captured, all the proof of the hypocrisy, he chose not to air the recordings. When people asked him why, his answer was simple but powerful. The best way to fight hypocrisy isn't to expose it, it's to replace it with something real. Clint understood that calling out wrongdoings publicly might feel good in the moment, but true change came from showing people a better way, not just shaming them for their failures. Rather than using the footage to create a public spectacle, he focused on changing the system from within. Today, if you walk into Vine and Liberty, you'll notice something new hanging on the wall. It's a plaque, simple but profound, that reads, "Character is what you do when no one is watching." This quote served as a daily reminder to both the staff and the customers that true values aren't about what you post on social media or how you present yourself to the world. They are about the choices you make when no one is looking, when the cameras aren't rolling, and when no one is expecting anything from you. And so, what began as a simple request for a glass of water, a small, humble act, snowballed into something much greater. It became a movement, a real change for the better, one small act at a time. The legacy of Vine and Liberty was restored, and with it, the spirit of what it had always been, a place where people truly cared for one another.